funky fantasy. The bola. Stratoceros. Special guest edition with Matt Jordan. It's the War of Nerds. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the War of Nerds podcast. Your bearded nerdy hosts are here, and my shadow double is taking my spot tonight. So, hope you're all ready for an exciting episode. I'm Nathan Helm, the Funky Fantasy Man.
I'm Alfred Muller, and I'm sorry if I phase in and out tonight.
And I'm Ryan Morgan, also known as Stratoceros, and a little bit of lore here. Nathan's in the shadows because he shaved his beard. Is it true? We'll find out later.
You shall find out later if it's true or not. And as for the phasing with Alfred, I taught him some Kingdom Society magic, so he learned how to do it. It's a new ability. He's still in the beginning stages, but we're working through it. And we have a special guest tonight. It's actually one of Alfred's friends, Matt Jordan. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about you yourself and what you do for a day job and hobbies, interests, et cetera, et cetera. Take the floor.
Cool. So again, I'm Matt Jordan. I'm Alfred's friend, or AJ as I know. Little background about me. I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps and had a blast doing it. Big nerd all my life. Started with reading C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, and went from there. Just went crazy with it all, and it all started with books. It all goes back to books and video games and tabletop RPGs, and yeah. So day job, I do highway maintenance, and by nighttime, I'm a video gaming, tabletop rolling, not so much closet geek, very out there in the open.
Absolutely.
That's awesome, and I've talked with Alfred and Ryan both about it. But C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia were one of the first series I read as a kid, and I mean they're fantastic. That was my precursor before I read Lord of the Rings, so that's super cool.
And then Ryan's read Dragonlance also.
Yeah, I saw the teaser trailer, and Ryan was talking about Dragonlance, and I was like, oh, he and I would get along because I've read a ton of the Dragonlance books, and when I got into D&D, my buddy that got me into D&D back in the Marine Corps, he was all, oh, well, have you read the Dragons of Autumn Twilight? I'm like, no, what's that? And he goes, oh, you've got to read this. But instead of putting me exactly on that first, he goes, oh, no, wait a minute. If you're going to understand the entire thing, kind of like I did with Alfred, I put him on Dragonlance. So it's like, you've got to read The Legend of Huma first to understand the whole thing.
Yep.
So that's where we both started with Dragonlance.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I want to start off with first question here for you, and that is, what is your favorite book series of all time? It doesn't matter what genre, and why is it your favorite? What as a reader makes a series your favorite?
I'm actually curious to hear the answer to this one too.
That's really tough.
Good.
AJ knows that I'm a huge Tolkien guy, and as much as I love Tolkien, I think my favorite book series probably is Dragonlance and not Lord of the Rings or anything like that. It's Lord of the Rings kind of my go-to, but yeah, overall story-wise and whatnot, I love Dragonlance, and it's for me, it's just like this really epic, super epic fantasy. It's almost like Joe Manganiello said it best, that Dragonlance is kind of like the Star Wars of D&D, almost, like the way the story is and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's just so much fun and adventure and comedy in it, especially with Tasselhoff. Oh my gosh, I've had a couple different Kinder halfling characters in D&D that have always been based on Taz, and they always have kleptomaniac tendencies and talk super fast, just like the Kinders do. And you know,
an
it,
adventure.
yeah, you're going on an adventure. Yeah.
So in your life today, do you feel like we're all busy, the older we get, life gets crazier. So do you find yourself more invested in like audiobooks, or do you still take the time to actually physically read a book?
I still sit down with an actual book, or uh, and he knows, like, I'm real big about having hardback books, but I've run out of room on the shelf because I've got books on the shelf, I've got books in front of the books, and then I've got books stacked on top of the books. And so, what was that, like a year and a half, 2 years ago, I switched over to a one of the Amazon Kindles, the Fire, and started doing all my books on it. And I never thought I'd see the day where I switched to like an electronic reader, but it has really helped me as far as like continue to grow my book collection without running out of room on the shelf. So, if I have it on the shelf, it comes off the shelf. If I don't have it there, I'm going to the Amazon Kindle. And if I don't have it there, I'm buying it on the Kindle.
I agree with you. The Kindle is, even the Kindle app on the phone, it's nice. Like for me, my vision's gotten worse with time. And so being able to dim it down and put the vision tinter on my phone and be able to read and scroll, zoom into the words, is nice. But I've gone motor mouth here for a few minutes. So Ryan, you look like you've been itching at the teeth to ask something.
Oh, always. But so with the Dragonlance Chronicles, like I mean, that's the one I didn't go back and start where I should. I still want to go back, and I'll probably audible all those books and reread the ones through the Chronicles that I've already read. But as far as like you mentioned Tasselhoff, is he your favorite character? And if not, which of that group is the one you're most drawn to?
Being an avid Dragonlance reader and fan, you probably already know who my favorite character is, because it's not Taz is cool, Taz is fun, but he's not my favorite. Who do you think my favorite character is?
I mean, I would be gravitating towards wrestling, but
Yep.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason I asked that question also is Tasselhoff is your typical halfling thief type character, but he also has like that innocence too. And I
He
think
does.
his relationship with wrestling, and he truly believes, no, he's still a good guy. No, he's still a good guy. He's gonna be a good guy. And slowly, when he finally accepts that change, I think it's like one of the most heart-wrenching twist of the entire Dragonlance series for me personally. So I was kind of curious with you liking Tasselhoff if you had similar notions or
That Yeah, there's that with Taz, and you see him do that especially throughout through I'd say all six of the main Dragonlance books. You got the three Chronicles, then you've got the in between books, and
Mhm,
then you've got the Twins trilogy, and
mhm,
through all six of those, Taz is always. I wouldn't necessarily say that he's rooting for Raceland, but yeah, he's like, oh, he's still a good guy and all that stuff. And when you not to, if you want to read the books, read them, not to try and spoil them too much, but Raceland does end up staying on the good side, even though he's the second mage in the
mhm,
history of all the mages to go from white to red to black. He wears all three robes at some point in his life.
mhm. Excellent.
That's awesome. Alfred, how about you? I know y'all probably know everything there is to know about each other, but
I was just gonna say that for Ryan, I love the audiobooks. So you'll enjoy them. The performance is amazing, just great beginning to end. So I think you'll enjoy that. You'll probably blow through them because they're so good. But I will say I'm gonna change topics a little bit.
Sure.
Are you allowed to do that?
I think so.
Oh, we do what we want.
all the time.
So speaking of stories, we've got your favorite book series. What is your favorite video game of all
Me? Ooh, favorite video game of all time has to be Final Fantasy VII, and it's all for the story. You guys were, kind of throwing that in my intro in the beginning. Matt enjoys the story aspect of video games, which I do because when you think about it, at the end of the day, that's all a video game is an electronic story that you get to play out. It's when I got introduced to tabletop games, that was the concept that was thrown to me. It's like, you like playing video games, right? Yeah, doesn't everyone? Yeah. Well, tabletop RPG is just a video game that you play out with dice, pencil, and paper. I was like, oh, cool, and I was sold on it instantly. But it is a video game is just a story that you get to play out. Granted, you don't have the unlimited choices that you do like you would in D&D, but it's still, like Final Fantasy VII, you had choices to make. You had, things that you could do, and it, got better with time, other games. But the story of Final Fantasy VII really roped me in. And I remember seeing that the advertisement for the game, I think it was in an old PlayStation magazine from way back that my buddy had, and he was telling me about it coming out. And he showed me the picture of the little town of Juneau there on the coast outside of Midgard and all that stuff. And it was the Sister Ray cannon sitting there, and there was like a caption that said, uh, "Someone get the guys who make cartridge video games a cigarette and a blindfold." I was like, "Oh, this looks cool," and started playing it, and like I said, the story just roped me in. You've got this guy Cloud Strife with this great big sword, the Buster Sword.
Helicopter blade.
Oh my gosh, man! And then I'd played other Final Fantasy games growing up too, but this one was just so much different because all the old ones played on the fantasy trope. You've got your knights and mages and things like that, and here you are, your ex-soldier of the Shinra Corporation and all this, and it had this kind of like modern but sci-fi but still fantasy twist to it. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII that'll always be my number one game.
See, I think a lot of games kind of moved in that direction. With I remember the first game that I had that had choices or repercussions for choices was Fable, the original Fable, where you could either become an angel or a demonic version of yourself, depending on the choices you made. And then you have games like Mass Effect that took it to everything you do is a choice and it affects the game is out. So I think outside of mass multiplayer online games heading in that direction seem to do pretty well, and they've got an unlimited, maybe not unlimited, they've got a very large selection of story you can choose from.
Well, even within the Final Fantasy games from that era, around that time, Final Fantasy VIII came out, later on, and a lot of people I knew, like after I moved to Pikeville when Final Fantasy VIII came out, some of the guys I hang out with are like, oh man, Final Fantasy VIII is way better than 7. So I got it and played it, and it was fun, but I was like, it's just not the same. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, to us it's better because you don't have the materia system. I loved the materia system because I think that's the only time in Final Fantasy it's been done. I stopped playing at Final Fantasy 9. After that I was like, it just isn't the same. And then I tried playing 13, and I think once it downloaded on 360, I played it for 30 minutes and shut it off, took it back to GameStop and sold it back to him. I was like, no, I've had enough.
Yeah.
But Hironobu Sakaguchi comes in. He's like, we're gonna do this materia system with our game for number 7 and all this stuff. And I mean, it was so great. I know a lot of people were confused back then, like, oh, how does this work? Because you could pair materia in the slots on your weapons and your armor, and certain materia worked with other ones. And the only way it would do it is if the slots were actually linked together, because you had individual slots, then you had some that had like two linked together was the common. I think there was one that had three or more. Don't quote me on that though. It's been a while since I've played it, but yeah, the materia system was great in that too for doing all your magic and your summons and even some of your abilities as well. And it was just everything about that game just wrote me in. Like even my keychain for my truck, I've got the Buster Sword keychain.
And
Very
I
nice.
I think it's ironic that you brought that up, because just in our last episode I mentioned Cloud with his helicopter blade sword. Because I have a reference to that in my book series, because I just love larger than life stuff like that. That just makes no sense. Total anime vibes, but it's just awesome. And you have this
Mhm.
character who carries it around, similar to like, Black Clover, or even in Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings, the sword that Dalinar Kalen carries around is basically similar to that, Oathbringers. So there's what I want to know though is, did you play Halo as a kid, or what was your first game system first of all? Um,
My
and
first game system was a NES.
okay, and did you play Halo growing up as a kid?
When Halo came out, I was in I think my junior or senior year of high school, and
Okay,
it was really I grew up poor. Our family was poor, so I had an NES up until I was about I want to say 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, and then I miraculously somehow got a Super Nintendo and played Donkey Kong Country and Samurai Showdown and stuff like that. And I had that Super Nintendo up until about 2000 before I got a PlayStation. And like when I played Final Fantasy the first time, it wasn't on my PlayStation. It was on my buddy Scotty's PlayStation before we moved to Pikeville when I was younger. Like the year it came out, I'm over at his house. We'd play Final Fantasy VII. We'd play Resident Evil. We'd play Nightmare Creatures, and but yeah, Halo was fun. I did play it, uh, and I remember before I left for the Marine Corps, it was my senior year. We went and hung out with some buddies of ours at one of their houses, and they had a game room at their house. They had 4 TVs that were set up, all back to back, and we had a LAN party, and we're sitting there playing each other in Halo. And then when I joined the Marine
nice.
Corps, when I got done with boot camp, and I got to my first school, which was C School in NAS, Pensacola, Florida, I bought an Xbox, and I felt like I was so cool because I was like, I can afford my own Xbox system now. I'm no longer down here. I'm up here. And I bought Halo, and then Halo 2 came out. I enjoyed it, but not as much as Halo 1. And then Halo 3
Oh
came
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah. Combat Evolved is where it's at. That was the most iconic Halo game for sure.
Now, listen here for all you young folks listening in. A LAN party used to be when us old folk would get together in the same room and play multiplayer.
Oh, I
And you had
remember.
to have. Yeah.
I remember sitting there in
Oh.
church. I have 16 TVs in the church game room. All 16 of them lined up with different systems there and there, and was playing against each other in the good old days.
Man.
So actually, I'm going to throw the question back at you two. What is a game? I mean, I know we touched a little bit on this on a previous episode, but for you guys, what's a game that stands out to you for the story that you might have played as a kid or recently?
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So whenever you want to take, you can take from there, Nathan.
Okay. So some of my favorites for story wise was definitely Sly Cooper. You just running around with this cool raccoon bandit, getting coins, slaying bosses, very kid friendly. So all parents were okay with their kids playing Sly Cooper. But when I got older, it was Assassin's Creed for me because the Ezio collection is really hard to beat for story mode. It was just like this original game idea that they tried to continue on. Black Flag was pretty fun, but I don't know, you just can't beat the story mode of the Ezio collection. Everything about it. Plus, you're in Italy and Rome and all these old historic places, and I would say that. And then the other game for story mode was definitely Halo. The first 3 Halo games were solid, classic story mode with Master Chief and Cortana. So those would be my top 3 as story. Well, hold on. Mass Effect had an awesome story, the original Mass Effect, and also Star Wars: The Force Unleashed 1 and 2 had amazing stories as well. And if you want to go way back, KOTOR had awesome Knights of the Old Republic.
Oh
But
yeah.
anyways, I could go on and on and on and on about awesome games with stories. How about you, Ryan?
So first off, to kind of throw back a little bit, you're talking about having that NES forever. We didn't grow up very wealthy either, but my parents also refused to let us have game systems. They were go outside, you go play. So they, like, for the longest time wouldn't allow us to have it. So the first system I ever got was like my buddy's old PlayStation I bought for $20, where I had to flip it upside down to keep the lid shut, and that was the only way it ran. But playing off of that, one of the first games I had for it, I think it was on PlayStation 1. If not, it was later when I got PlayStation 2, was Tenchu Stealth Assassin, which was
That
where
was a
you
great
played.
game.
Yeah, amazing game. And like linear storyline, I don't know that it was like the greatest, like from mission to mission, but the stories within a mission I thought were really cool because like the choices you made and whether you got spotted kind of affected how that mission would go, and if you had to be a little more stealthy or less stealthy, but each mission kind of had like a theme to it of what was going on and why you were performing that mission or assassinating that person. So like I kind of really got into those missions because of their little stories. And then I know I've talked about this game before, but Disgaea is like a tactical game where it's kind of like chess. You
Yep.
move characters around, but it has this anime vibe, and the storylines, there's like 7 of them now, and like 6 is terrible, forget it ever happened. But 1 through 5 and 7, the stories are amazing. And like you kind of really get into it. The game never ends. You can just keep playing to like ridiculous levels of these characters that go up to like 99999 and just keep boosting the numbers and stuff. But like the storylines for each of those games were why I've gone back and replayed them multiple times, and I have like years worth of hours devoted to those, all 7 of those games, like if you were to combine all of them. So I'd definitely say those. And then an honorable mention that I haven't played, but I've just heard so many people gush over the story. I'm blanking on the name, but I think Nathan brought it up before. You switch between, like, you can either be kind of a ninja or you could take the samurai route, but it's very like Japanese culture, um, very spiritual with their thing, but you play as this character who's at war and his uncle is like leading him. I'm gonna have to look up this game because it's gonna kill me. But I've heard so many people talk about this game and the gameplay of it, and the story you go through there, he kind of has to make a choice between following his uncle's way of honoring the samurai code or going more of the assassin route and dishonoring his uncle, and like you get the choice between the two. But I've heard so much about this game and the storyline for it, but it's a very newer game. Ghosts of Tsushima maybe or something like that. But yeah, I have not played it, but I've heard so much about it. It's one I would play just for the story, and I've heard the gameplay is even just as amazing. So like that's one on my bucket list, but going along that line, that would definitely be one I would look at.
Talk about not know, like my first game system was my dad's hand-me-down original Nintendo. I played
Yeah.
the heck out of that. didn't know what PlayStation was until I was like in my junior year or my junior high. Until I was in junior high, I thought it was like a Hot Wheels play set where
When you had seen PlayStation, you were already a man.
uh, but I did end up. I skipped PlayStation. I ended up with a PlayStation 2 in junior high. But I'm going to throw it on to console because that's Ryan's favorite way to play, especially nowadays. But Diablo 2 for me, I love the story, I love the gameplay, and I can't really play the Diablo 3. I didn't really get into Diablo 4. I played a little bit, but nothing too special. But Diablo 2 for me, the story and the way the story was set up, broken up into acts of play, and then you went through it and cinematic scenes in between the three. That was new for me to be able to watch a movie unfold as you're playing the game. The story itself was just fantastic. Being able to actually influence the world, at least that's how I felt as I was playing it. Because like, all right, you have to go do this, and then I went and I did that. Awesome, I'm actually doing this stuff, which was cool. So for me, Diablo 2 is one of my favorites for story.
And can we all just
Yeah,
what's that? Oh, I was gonna say, can we all just admit that the original Modern Warfare had one of the best story mode campaigns out of any first-person shooter game? I mean,
Absolutely not. I refuse. I've
that's okay.
never played it, Nathan. So I can't. I got to be the arguer here. So
So when I was active duty Marine Corps, specifically once I re-enlisted and started working at Paris Island as a marksmanship instructor, all those guys out there are
PMI.
infantry, and yeah, I was a PMI out there, and
Nice.
just about everyone that works on the ranges is infantry or artillery. And at that time, I bought a 360. It was my first, like, I guess you'd say big system because I had a PlayStation 2 up until that PlayStation 2 lasted till my kids. That was 2018 before I had to replace it with a PS3, and then I got them a PS4. But that 360 was a big deal for me because when I had my original Xbox, old Duke system, I didn't have it for very long. Like I played the Halo games, like we talked about. That 360 came out. All my buddies in the Marine Corps were playing Modern Warfare 2, and then Black Ops when it came out. Black Ops is
Yep.
huge, but yeah, the Modern Warfare story, like for a modern game set in our age, it's just phenomenal. It's something you read
Yep.
in like
it's
yeah.
I even like the Black Ops. The switching
back and forth kind of. You think you're fighting an enemy, but you're really the enemy the whole time.
Oh yeah, your sleeper agent.
That I thought was
Yeah.
pretty cool.
They did similar storyline in Ghosts. A lot of people didn't like the game as a whole for the multiplayer and maps, but Ghosts storyline was actually really good.
Yes.
The campaign was really fun. And Black Ops 3 probably had one of the coolest, like, unique campaigns. Some people weren't really big about like the running on the walls and the freaking like the jump jetpack backpacks that you had that you could do the triple jump and stuff, but they're just like, oh, this is too futuristic. Well, yeah, that's what it's meant to feel like. Like, not to the degree of Infinite Warfare, but really, really quick, I want to change topics again, and we can come back to video games. But I've been wanting to ask you since the beginning, what is your favorite lore element of Lord of the Rings?
Ooh.
we're leaving this pause in because it's deep thought, deep
Oh,
question.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Let the mind swirl. Let your mind think about it. The wizards were never late. Precisely when he means to.
I think my favorite element of the whole shebang are the five wizards.
Yep.
That's a good answer. Do you have a favorite of them?
Oh yes, of course. It's sitting out in the driveway right now. It's right in my
Gandalf.
It's dark gray, so I named it Gandalf the Gray. and Gandalf, not Gandalf the White. Gandalf the Grey is my favorite wizard in all of Lord of the Rings. He's a little bit rougher around the edges and whatnot. Granted, he's got more power as Gandalf the White, but to me, Gandalf the Grey was just this perfect, like, fatherly figure for everyone. Tried to steer them the right way that they needed to go without, pressuring, but he still had the sass and attitude throw their way at times, when it was needed. And just get to me, Gandalf the Grey couldn't be beat. And he was the only one to complete the task given to him while everyone else went off and did their own thing. Now there's debate on the two blues as to whether they actually did what they were supposed to, and there wasn't a whole lot left about it. And the general idea was that they went to the Far East and they helped influence things out there that kept Sauron busy, so he couldn't, put all his attention where it needed to be. And if that's the case, then cool. But Gandalf is just number one.
Dude, Gandalf the Mire is one of the coolest characters ever created in Lord of the Rings. I mean, if you go date back to the first age, when Eru, the god of Lord of the Rings, literally created the Mires as a protection mechanism for Middle Earth. So, you had Sauron, who was one Mire, and you had Gandalf, who was another. Well, Sauron went off and served Morgoth, and he was also had the ability of shape-shifting because he studied dark arts and dark magic. Whereas Gandalf was gifted with immortality, with an immortal soul. And so his corporeal form could die, but he would be sent back to Eru's realm and he would be reborn with his corporeal form completely. We saw that twice. So you saw it as him transforming into Gandalf the White. That was his body being repaired for the third time. And you saw the second time that he was reborn, which was in Rings of Power. So he's been reborn a total of 3 times. And that's a really cool thing about the Myers. And that not even that, Galadriel actually made Gandalf's weapons for him. The white staff was created by Galadriel herself because she was an expert with magic. And I mean, yeah, you could go to Elrond and talk about Saruman, and it's pretty interesting. I love the history about Morgoth and Saruman. And have you watched the Rings of Power, Matt?
I've watched the Rings of Power, and while we were having dinner, urged him to do the same. And I'm kind of a purist when it comes to Tolkien, and like, if you're going to do something, you need to follow the lore. Granted, what they were going off of, they had limited knowledge on what they were working with. Even if you throw the Silmarillion in there, which that guy can tell you, I can go off on a tangent about the Silmarillion, how people read it and how they do it wrong all the time. But I just lost my train of thought.
So
I'll bring it back for you, brother.
Yeah, Rings of Power. I told him, I said, you need to watch it. It may not be lore accurate, but it is cinematically pleasing just to be back in Middle Earth. And yeah, cinematically pleasing, but it is, I consider it Tolkien fan fiction.
Believe it or not, it is actually, because I'm like you. I want everything to be lore accurate. Rings of Power is 80% lore accurate. And they talk about, well, if you don't hit everything on the marker, then it's not lore accurate. I am willing to take what I can get. So when I see the parts that are lore accurate, more so I think Sauron was the part that was the most lore accurate about the entire show. And the guy they got to play him was phenomenal. And you didn't understand how good he was until the end with Galadriel, and that exactly what scene I'm talking about. That was, where he screams, I am Sauron, like that. You just like, you realize they picked the perfect actor for that. Everybody was whining and complaining like, oh, you picked this like, Kirkland brand Aragorn to play this guy. I'm just like, well, you'll understand that he's actually a shapeshifter if you know the lore about Sauron.
Well, and if you understand Tolkien at all, a lot of his inspiration, like they talk about his inspiration from World War I and all that stuff, but him being, Catholic and stuff, the elements of faith are there. Sauron is Satan, and Satan, you see in the modern day is like, devil with the horns and the pitchfork, and biblically that's not accurate. He's described as the most beautiful angel that God ever created, and we see that in Rings of Power with Sauron. He's this great looking guy. It's like, oh, he seems very trustworthy and stuff, and haha,
Deceptive.
ha, yes,
Just like Satan can shapeshift.
hmm
Yeah. Literal master of deception. Like he goes around, he starts with Galadriel because she's going to be the most easy to persuade at first. Not because Galadriel's a pushover. She's actually the coolest female character in all of Lord of the Rings. But because of what she had gone through with like the elves, her people were going back to their home, and she was betrayed by her own people, and her brother was killed. That part I don't think is lore accurate, but whatever, it's part of the story. And you got this guy who is pretending to be somebody that he's not. If he can convince the entire council of elves and Galadriel and fool them, that's saying something. And then he goes around to the other races, the dwarves and the men being the most greedy. And then that leaves him to creating the one ring that rules them all. So I'm actually excited for season 2 to see what they do with the rings, if they're going to get completed, or we're going to see the one ring getting created in Mount Doom. I really want to see him in his battle armor. I'm still salty about the acting choices for Isildur and a couple others, but they really nailed it on the top of the head with Galadriel and young Elrond and Sauron, and the guy who played Gandalf was great too. So I thought we got to. I don't know if you agree with this, but I think we got to see more of magic aspects of Lord of the Rings than we ever did in the movies.
Well,
We saw a bit more in The Hobbit.
there was more magic in the first age. We see the most magic in the first age, and then in the second age, it starts to really wane off. And then by the time the third age rolls around, you've got remnants of magic, like some of the weapons and stuff like that. When the hobbits wind up in the Barrow Downs and they find those old weapons and stuff, but they have magic properties to them. That's why the Witch King is able to be stabbed by it and actually take some damage from it because it's because of its magical properties and stuff. But that kind of it puts me in the mind of Brett's D&D world. Low magic, but magic everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things I love about Lord of the Rings. It's epic fantasy, but it's not filled with magic. The magic is there, but it's almost like Game of Thrones too. Yeah, there was a bunch of magic in it back way back, but nowadays it's like a whisper of its former self.
Yeah, and I think
soft magic, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you see some people try and like mimic it. Probably the best job of that is Game of Thrones, Martin mimicking Tolkien's style of world. But you'll get like often you'll be like, oh, even like King Arthur, there's magic there because you have Merlin and stuff. But like more modern stories, I can't think of specific titles, but they have a magic weapon, but that magic weapon is ultra powerful. In Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, you have like Sting from Lord of the Rings. It's a magical item, but it's not OP. It's not impervious to everything. It's still it's a mundane weapon, but it can alert you to orcs. Or in Game of Thrones, you have the Beric Dondarrion's sword. He's able to light it on fire with the Lord of Light. But those kinds of things, and it's done in a way that it fits the world. It's like magical realism rather than fantasy magic.
Yeah, he literally uses his own blood when he slashed the sword. His blood is the enactment for the fire because of the Lord of Light. Now we didn't really get any explanation on who the Lord of Light was. Was Melisandre like? We knew she was like a witch or a mage, whatever you want to call her, and she used a lot of dark magic, like the shadow magic with Renly Baratheon and all that stuff. So soft magic, there's no real rule system to it. It's a loosely described, loosely explained with a lot more elements of mystery. Lord of the Rings is the same way with the soft magic aspects to it. You see Gandalf do these huge feats like Battle the Balrog, and you don't actually know what he's doing. He's just doing it. But then at least the parts where like the Witch King. Well, what I want to know is why Gandalf, the most powerful Mire who ever existed, with a weapon that should be impenetrable, built by Galadriel, is able to be snapped in half by the Witch King of the Nazgul. Like, oh, fool, no man can kill me. I am no man. Well, okay. Anticlimactic, but I love it. But Gandalf, I it really frustrated me that his staff was just snapped in half like that. To me, I feel like that was one slip up in Peter Jackson's directing. But
Yeah, because yeah, I agree with that, and that's been brought up before in other places too. It's like, first of all, the Witch King of Angmar would not have had the power to do that. He's nowhere near the power level that Gandalf the White is.
correct.
I,
Yeah, Gandalf
Gandalf
the
is
White.
like over 9,000, you know, and the
It's
Witch
over
King
9,000.
is
No, dude, like, do you know that Gandalf is actually 55,000 years old?
yeah,
He's
he's
been
pretty
around
old.
since the beginning. Yeah, like since the beginning of existence, like predating the First Age that Tolkien talked about in the Tales of Middle Earth and partly in the Silmarillion. But you little things like that, you think of Gandalf the White, who he goes to when they're in oh my gosh, why is my brain the not Helm's Deep, but it was where they were before Rohan, the
Yeah,
Gap of
Rohan.
Rohan, and the king was taken over by like Grima Wormtongue was there, and Saruman basically poisoned the king's mind. And help me out with the king's name, Theoden.
Theoden, yeah.
Theoden the king. Gandalf straight up just destroyed Saruman in that fight. And you think back to where they first fought, Gandalf the Grey versus Saruman the Wise, there in the tower, and the second tower, and you're just like Isengard, and you're like, man, Gandalf got his butt handed to him by his old master. They're like, well, how is Saruman his master? Gandalf predates Saruman in age and wisdom, but that's the thing. When you deep dive into the lore, you realize, oh, Gandalf loses his memories every single time that he comes back, and he's going to seek out the most wise person that he can. So,
Well, and in the lore too, when the White Council was formed, he was put up to be the leader and he turned it down. He did not
yep,
want to be the leader of the White Council. So that was given to Saruman.
correct. He couldn't remember enough about his life to be a leader. Like he knew things, but there were gaps in his memory missing. And Galadriel helped him a lot with that. They were very close with Galadriel. Gandalf was. Um, just Galadriel is just one of the most OP characters. She's one of the only elves that knows magic, like in all of Lord of the Rings. That's pretty cool. Like the further back you go to the Second Age and the First Age, elves using magic is a lot more common. And when you really look and deep dive into Tolkien's like history about elves and the languages and how many brackets of the Elvish language there is that he wrote, there's like 11 different brackets of Elvish language. It's insane. Anyways, I'm rambling. Sorry.
Well, and I was going to say too, like on the subject of elves, I think it was a great crime in the films that Glorfindel was not shown when they go uh, to Rivendell, because in the lore, Glorfindel lives in Rivendell with Elrond. He's a resident there, and Glorfindel goes all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, he's the forger. He's the ring forger. Like dude's been around, well, like you said, as long as Elrond for the elves. So if not predating he predates Elrond, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
he goes all the way back to Gondolin.
Man, Tolkien, man, a master world crafter. His lore is so rich and thick, and you don't even realize it from the surface, but he leaves it open. We've actually talked about this on the show with this, like, when should things end? When could have things kept going? And like Tolkien did it perfectly. He ended it with you like, okay, more could happen, right? But then you just get to go deep dive into the history of Middle Earth, and I mean, yeah,
It's a great point that Ryan made in season one's episodes about world building and how you will never incorporate everything, but
Tolkien is a master if you want to follow how to do it right, and he has so much lore to the point where you could have books on just the lore, history texts on the world he created, but you don't get but a fraction of that because it wasn't important to the story. The story was what it was, and he needed that stuff, or just wanted to do that stuff to have that in his mind as he was crafting the story. But then to only bring some of it in when needed is done fantastic.
And to think that it all started with him coming up with, was it Quinion or Sindarin Elvish that he came up with first? Because
Sindarin.
Yeah, it was Sindarin because Sindarin's the common. So he invents a language and then builds a story around it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that starts off as a bedtime story pretty much for his kids. And then, you know, The Hobbit, you know, people love it so much and they're like, hey, you might want to consider. I'm like Frank Herbert with Dune, like, hey, this is a great book. You should write some more. And, you know, of course, you know, Frank Herbert didn't want to do more than just the first book. He's like, no, I really don't want to. But, you know, Tolkien really starts to explore his world.
Yep.
And then,
Oh, yeah.
That's where I get pissed off with, like, well, with Martin and stuff, like Interview with Martin, like, well, you know, because people called Martin out all the time for not, you know, taking his sweet time with the Song of Ice and Fire. And well, you know, his Tolkien's greatest work was the Silmarillion, and he didn't finish it. First of all, that was not Tolkien's greatest work. If you think that Tolkien's greatest work was the Silmarillion, you're very, very wrong, because that's just a story compendium. His greatest work was Lord of the Rings.
Mm.
Yeah,
And
some would even argue The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could get on board with
The
that.
book.
Yeah.
The book, not the movies, because the movies were kind of drawn out a little. Peter Jackson, you know, was trying to make Christopher Tolkien happy, so I get it. And, you know, more Lord of the Rings stuff, yay. But that's what he was known for.
Well, I was gonna say on this note, we're talking about the I'm gonna butcher the name.
Silmarillion.
Yes, and how deep it goes. And I had always heard, and you guys can correct me if this is wrong, when they did the Ring of Powers, they were only allowed to use like an excerpt of it. Like they weren't allowed to use the entirety of it. They had this very narrow thing that they were allowed to work off of when they were coming up with it. But the more you guys talk about it, it's so deep. Even if you had 10% of it to work with, like that 10% must have been around what they were actually trying to build that off of. So I still think that's enough source material to come up with a good storyline. But I do think you're handicapping the production of it by going that route too. So I mean, if you guys want to expand upon that, and you obviously know more about it than I do by far. So, but
Yeah.
What's that, Alfred?
I said I'm in the same boat as Ryan. I'm kind of just learning as we sit here.
I'll let you borrow some books.
You just go online and look it up. I mean, you know, we were talking about the Sindarin Elvish language, which was the first most commonly spoken Elvish language amongst the common elves. You know, if you date back all the way to the elves that made the Great Trip, you know, this was way back in the First Age, but there's different languages. Exactly. And he's got like 11 or 12 tiers of Elvish languages that are split up among people who didn't make the Great Journey, people who did, most commonly spoke, even languages that the dwarves would speak, that they understood to speak back and forth with elves back when they were allies before they were split, and when the three races of Middle Earth did not get along. And so just the Elvish, just the language enough alone, like Tolkien was a linguist and he used, you know, Celtic, Welsh, Scottish Gaelic.
Norse was his go-to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Latin as well. There's a lot of Latin in there. But that was what made it so cool is, you know, he's going backpacking right through like the European Alps, and all of a sudden he comes across this valley with this city just that's glorious, and he's writing in his notebook and sketching because he was a phenomenal artist. If you've ever seen his journals or notebooks that people have pictures of, he actually drew what he envisioned like Minas Morgul to look like, or Minas Tirith, or like Rivendell. And he actually found Rivendell while he was backpacking, and that was what gave him the inspiration to start the true story after writing the language. There's a lot of really rich history about just Tolkien's journeys after World War I. Him and C.S. Lewis were very close friends. You know, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien brought Lewis to Christ, and then they kind of went their own separate ways after the war. Lewis went to be a professor, and Tolkien went on his backpacking, journeys. So, and Tolkien outlived Lewis, but yeah.
I found out that George MacDonald was actually teacher, mentor for Lewis and Tolkien, and corresponded with Tolkien about the lives.
I think it was more so for C.S. Lewis in the preface of George MacDonald's biography or whatever that one of our buddies has. He, Lewis mentions that, oh, well, my master, George MacDonald. I didn't know he had any kind of influence over Tolkien.
Yeah, he was.
Oh yeah,
He was great. I found that out when I was looking at like what my inspiration for writing and stuff was, and I was like, oh dang, I didn't realize this guy was connected with both epic authors like that.
and
But,
Alfred, you write supernatural, dude. And if you need some inspiration, C.S. Lewis is the only author I know of that successfully wrote a book from a demon's perspective called the Screwtape Letters. And he even said he said afterwards, I will never write a book like that again. It was too much of a spiritual hardship. And he's just like, the things you're visited by after writing something like that is it takes you to a dark place. So he stopped from that, but it is a good book to understand how to write supernatural from a very accurate standing point of view. Lewis talked about his relationship with God and how that helped him really, really carve out the words for the Screwtape Letters. But it was books like that and Lewis and Tolkien that ended up getting you like The Witcher or Dune. Like the Witcher books came out right around the time of World War II. And that was just a wee bit after The Hobbit and things like that came out. And then you started getting spread out with more book series that followed in their steps. So
I think that's another great series that kind of gets crapped on a little bit because most people, I don't think, understand it when they're reading the Witcher books. That the first book, The Last Wish, is actually a story compendium of short stories, and you have to read it as such because you can get confused and
like
lost.
the Silmarillion?
Yeah, just like
when people try to read it straight through, I'm like, this makes no sense to me.
it's a dictionary encyclopedia of lore. It's not meant to make sense when you do that. You have to take it bit by bit and look at all the different journeys. Look at Sauron's story with Morgoth in the First Age. Look at the story of the elves in the Great Journey. Look at the story of help me out here, Matt. Where the elves used to be.
Well, that's why I'm glad in recent years Christopher Tolkien went back and revisited some of the stories in the Silmarillion. So we have, I guess you'd say, co-authorship between J.R.R. and Christopher Tolkien for The Children of Hurin, which is in the Silmarillion, Beren and Luthien, which is in the Silmarillion, The Fall of Gondolin, which is in the Silmarillion, and then you get into some of the stuff that's in like Tales of Numenor and other books that have come along like that. That all started off in the Silmarillion. That's why people get confused because you've got all these different things, especially when it's talking about everything being made, and the true magic there is when everything is sung into creation, not spoken through song. Yeah. And that's why I get so aggravated at Brett when he wants to trash on Tom Bombadil and all this stuff. It's like, look, Tom Bombadil is not who you think he is. He sings all the time. Who do you think he is?
Oh yeah,
he picks up the ring and plays with it like it's a toy because no evil can touch him. Who do you think Tom Bombadil is? He's not Tom Bombadil. He's Tom Bombadil, but he's not Tom Bombadil.
man, the Numenorian history is actually one of the Tales of Numenor is one of the coolest parts of the Silmarillion, and that was actually the part that they got privileged to get the material from for Rings of Power was the arc of the history of Numenor and the fall of Numenor, which started because of Sauron and creating the rings. The elves, convincing the Council of the Elves to make the rings with Galadriel and all that stuff, leading to the Second Great War, which Elrond talks about in the Lord of the Rings. And so the Tales of Numenor is a lot of fun. And I really, really hope that season 2 kind of shines a lantern on that a bit more. Because I mean,
I hope it does.
seeing, man, like I think my favorite part of the Rings of Power was for you, Matt. I'm gonna say it, and I'm gonna speak in riddles here so that these two don't understand. But the South Reach, you know exactly what I'm talking about at the end.
Mhm.
Isn't that the coolest thing ever? Getting to see that, like,
To see how it was and what it became. Yes.
yes, 100%. It was, man, it was juicy. Alfred and Ryan, you'll understand exactly. South Reach, you'll know exactly what that means.
You got
The
to
Southland. Just you wait. Just you stinking wait.
So
Oh man.
to tie all this kind of back in to where we came from, we've talked about gaming, we've talked about books, we've talked about the deep lore with Lord of the Rings and everything associated with it. A lot of the key theme through all this, especially your love of games, is the story itself. What about a story draws you in? And we can open this up. Matt, you can answer first, then we can all kind of throw in our thoughts on it. But like, what from any story is what catches you, draws you in, and makes it a good story for you personally?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to pin down to just one thing because there's a lot of different stories with a lot of different elements that have hooked me over the years, and especially in video games. When AJ brought me on for this, and he's like, "Oh, we're going to talk about video games and specifically like stories of video games and whatnot." And I was like, "Oh, well, I know Final Fantasy VII is going to be in there. That's number one from childhood and stuff." But uh, with it's got its own elements to it, and if you're a big fan of like Japanese culture and lore and all that stuff, like in Final Fantasy VII, for going back to that, it's ultimately Cloud versus Sephiroth, light versus dark, and and specifically in Japanese lore, it's based on the sword fight between Sasuke Kojiro and Miyamoto Musashi.
Mhm.
And I don't know if y'all have ever heard the story. I won't go into it and bore y'all to death, but Sasuke was a great fighter in his own right, and so was Musashi. I think everyone nowadays knows who Miyamoto Musashi was, but
Yeah.
he beat Sasuke Kojiro, one of the best swordsmen in Japan, with a bokken, a wooden sword, and he does it by basically depleting him of his patience, showing up late for the duel, and the whole time he's being rode over there, he's carving out this wooden sword. And when he gets there, Sasuke comes running out with his big Odachi, great big long sword, which is where Sephiroth's sword comes from, the Masamune blade, or Masamune. And Miyamoto Musashi just gets out of the boat. He comes running out too. He's got the sun at his back. Sasuke's looking in the sun. Musashi jumps up in the air and just boop, hits him on the head and kills him. And the whole story, well, I don't want to say the whole story, but Cloud versus Sephiroth is based on that. Something so old, And then one of my favorite modern games, Destiny 2, it's not everyone's cup of tea. The story for Destiny 2 is epic, and it is sprawling. It is wide. There's all sorts of lore you can discover within the first Destiny when they still did the Grimoire cards. You'd find a piece of lore, and it didn't give it to you in game. You had to get on the Destiny website, look it up, and read the lore to see how it pertained to the game. A lot of people didn't like that, but then they started incorporating it into the game in Destiny 2. And there's so many elements. You've got, the Hive alien race. You've got the Fallen, which are kind of like these multi-armed space pirate junk salvagers. You've got the Awoken, which are basically space elves. You've got the Cabal, which are kind of like space orcs. and then you've got exos, which are droids, but they have actual personality because they're actual people that were put in, like their conscious was put into these mechanical bodies, and and it all goes back to the classic trope of light versus dark.
Oh yeah. And I think the Legend of Zelda and Skyrim really go into that really well as well with the lore stuff. Skyrim, the lore is there if you want to discover it. You can go read the books, you can go like within the game, just books all over the place, and you can learn them to learn shouts and spells and slay dragons and stuff. But you can also learn the history about Hyrule. Or not Hyrule. That's Zelda. And my
Yep.
brain's
Yeah,
playing
I was about
talking
to
about
say,
two
it's
of the
like,
same. My
I
bad.
don't
Talking
recall
about
the Emperor ruling over Hyrule.
no. I'm talking about two games at the same time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're
Whiterun
good.
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
and then Hyrule with Zelda and just Ganondorf and everything. Like it's just those are two of the best fantasy games for me, at least when it comes to lore. And Zelda's been around for forever, so I mean, yeah, that's stuff you could talk about forever. Video games and not just the
I've
characters
still
like
I've still got my gold cartridge, Legend of Zelda, and a retro bit to play it on.
oh nice. And you mentioned like the coolest fight in all of Final Fantasy, which is Sephiroth against Cloud. And I mean, that's just like, it's awesome. I literally named a character off of Sephiroth in my series, just because it's an awesome name, and he's two, an awesome character. So, but yeah,
But
but
within that game, though, the Turks were my favorite. When you hear the music, some cool dudes in suits were showing up.
I think for me to answer your question, Ryan, it's conflict. It's the kind of conflict that can be introduced. So mainly in like story, I love watching the character overcome the conflict. I love seeing how it is how it unfolds. So that is where a story will grab me. It doesn't translate as well in video games, I don't think, but maybe because you still have to go through the motions and overcome the conflict. So that I think for me in story is what drives me and makes a story enjoyable.
No,
yeah,
he's all about character growth.
I think the best part about a video game is honestly just discovery as a whole.
Yes.
You want good characters, you want good plot, you want big open world, but it's discovery. That's why Assassin's Creed is one of my favorite games, because it's all about discovery. You can do these side quests that open up different parts of the map. You can meet these different characters and create allies, learn all these different moves and secret assassin techniques. And it's just like discovery. That I think for me has always been the pinnacle of a video game. It's just discovery.
It reminds me of like D&D when the dungeon master has created a world and the players just want to rush to the end of the story, but the DM has dozens upon dozens of hours of research and planning set up for you, and you just want to run through the story. You're missing out on so much that you could really dive into and sink your teeth in.
Kind of like
Spoke-
my world.
Yes, just like your world.
Spoken like a true dungeon master there.
100%. Well, I think we are getting towards that time. So do you guys have any, Alfred or Ryan, do you guys have any last questions?
I mean, I just was going to touch on that in general. Like, I think we kind of came to a good consensus there that everybody's reason to be drawn to a story is a little bit different. We had a little bit of theme with the good versus evil, the world building with the lore that's involved, the conflict, the character growth. I think all that's important, but obviously as authors, you can't hit every single one of those notes, but your audience is going to be drawn to certain keys. So, I mean, that was why I was mostly curious, because you seem to really be drawn to the story aspect of stuff. So what you may read out of that story, someone else may not. But so, I mean, that was kind of my curiosity from that. But I definitely think that was a good range of what you can get out of a good story. So, I mean,
Yeah.
The last thing that
I-
I'll say. Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, this was just going to be my last question. Matt, after hanging out with three crazy authors here, and I'm also a narrator, so I'm even more insane. Does this maybe make you think about writing your own story? I mean, you have a good grasp on what makes a good story and what you
Have I
enjoy out
been
of it.
writing my own story?
I didn't even plan that question.
Have I been writing my own story?
Yes, he actually has.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, then hurry
I'm
up.
very, very, yeah, I'm very behind on it.
Matt is an interesting. If like you wanted to create a character of Matt, it's very interesting. Whereas one of his things is he will create when he's in the mood. You can't force him to do any
Oh,
type of creation. Like he'll do ships in a bottle. He'll
Sea of Thieves fan.
ships in a bottle, woodwork, origami. He had a bonsai tree for a while, which was really cool, but it only when the mood suits him. So I think when the story is done, it'll be amazing. But when it will be done, I don't have an answer.
Me either.
that's actually the right answer because you
Mhm.
want it to be organic. If you force something to come out, it 10 out of 10 every single time, it's going to be worthless because you were not enjoying the process. You were making it a chore versus a passion and something that you enjoy. So good on you for, doing stuff that you love when you have the motivation and the feeling for it. But yeah, that was my last question. So
Last thing I will say is with like lit RPG and video games turned into books has become a super popular thing nowadays. The topic that we've been talking about,
I thought it was games being turned into shows.
that too. But
I mean, we just got Fallout on
yeah,
Amazon Prime.
Nathan said that we got to watch Fallout too.
I've been watching it.
But I would say that there is a game, Sea of Thieves, and that one has full-length novels that are companions to the game itself.
There's two.
Which is so cool to think like we're getting so many new ways to tell stories, and you've got so many crossing genres and crossing mediums that I think we're in maybe not necessarily a golden age, but we're at least in a bronze age of storytelling. I feel like right now between movies, TV shows, video games, books, comics, plays that are still being done on stage. Those are it's just pretty awesome to think. And like we talked about The Witcher, which was a book turned into a video game, turned into a TV show.
The book's always better.
It is.
absolutely. Well, Ryan, you got anything else, brother?
No, I think that's a good wrapping up
Okay.
place for this one.
Well, for all of our listeners, thank you for joining us for another special guest episode. And thank you, Mr. Matt Jordan, for joining us for this crazy party.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's always a good time in this house. So we have been your bearded nerdy hosts once again. And make sure you like, subscribe, and follow and comment and all the good stuff that you always do. And until next time, do 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 funky fantasy. Bum 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 ba da dum. The ball. Bum 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 ba dum bums. Stratton, you know what? This ending song does not work very well with the Super Smash Mario Brothers. So instead of that, funky fantasies, the bowl, Stratosaurus, Matt Jordan, it's the War of Nerds. See y'all next time.